All right, in this part of chapter 12, we're going to be dealing with looking at dealing with difficult customers as well as coworkers. So, difficult customers are going to always be challenging. So, the way you approach them and handle them is going to be very crucial. Okay, so when you're dealing with somebody that's a novice user or very technical illiterate, so to speak, you want to be very specific with your instructions. Okay, you want to tell, if you can, tell them exactly where to click and everything like that. It always helps if you can follow along as well. And this is where virtual machines come in handy so well because you don't know what kind of operating system people are dealing with. And if you got somebody running an older OS like XP, you can just boot up a virtual machine running XP and you can follow step by step so you know exactly what to tell them to click on. Okay, don't tell the customers to do anything that might destroy data without having them back it up first. Okay, again, like I mentioned before, nothing makes a customer, more irate than deleting little Susie's, 2-year-old pictures or whatever. So make sure you back everything up before you have them do anything that can destroy data. Okay, have them repeatedly tell you what's displayed on the screen, so that you know what they're looking at. And nowadays they do have software like LogMeIn and uh, other remote desktop software. Okay, so TeamViewer is another one, so that you can actually connect to these users, and then you can see exactly what they're seeing. So it has become easier. Okay, but try to follow along when you can. Give them plenty of opportunity to ask questions because a lot of times these questions can end up answering questions for you. Okay, so if they ask you something specific, you can say, okay, this is probably what they tried before. Okay, compliment the customer whenever you can. If the customer cannot help you solve the problem without coaching, and I love this part, tactfully request that the user have someone else more experienced call you. Do me a favor, if you come up with a tactfully way to do this, please share it with me because I have racked my brain trying to come up with a tactful way to do this, and it's just, I think it's impossible. Because I mean, it's how do you tell somebody, hey, you're too ignorant to figure this out. Give me somebody else that can. So if you find a way to do that, please let me know. I would love to hear that. Okay. As always, the customers that are overly confident, or I mean, those are a joy to deal with. Okay. You have to be really careful with some of these. Complement their knowledge, experience, and insight. So that they, basically just stroke their ego, so to speak. Slow down the conversation. Okay. So a lot of times when these overconfident people call you, they're going to try to tell you, I've done this, 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 and I think it's this. Okay, well, first off, and I've done this before too. You're so used to troubleshooting and you're so used to fixing things that sometimes you overlook the simplest explanation of the problem. And they may do the same thing. So if you slow down the conversation and actually, like the next one says, use your problem solving skills to start very basic, you may come across an issue that they haven't tried or a solution they haven't tried. So that's slowing down the conversation helps out a lot. Okay, be careful. Try not to accuse them of making a mistake. Okay, because again, they know everything, so they're going to be mad whenever you accuse them of that. Okay, even though the customer might be using technical jargon, don't use the same jargon back. And this one can be hard because a lot of times, when we're surrounded by other techie people, we just instantly go into that mode where we start throwing around acronyms and everything like that. The reason this is very important when you're dealing with customers is because in the world of IT, there's so many different facets. I mean, you've got networking, you've got programming, you've got digital media, you've got, uh, you know, computer hardware. You got all these different areas that you deal with in computers. Sometimes the jargon for one area is not the same as another area. So when you're using an acronym for networking, they may be referring to, or they may know the acronym as something completely different because their understanding of computers is more on the programming side or something like that. So make sure you refrain from using all those acronyms and that jargon when at all possible. When the customer's complaining, be an active listener. A lot of times, when you just sit there and let them vent, they end up calming down quite a bit. Okay, and try to repeat the problem to them occasionally just to make sure that they know you're listening. Okay, that you're not just sitting there, sitting the phone on the table and letting them go off on you. Okay, try to make sure you start everything from the beginning so you can see what's been covered and what hasn't. Okay, try not to be defensive, which I know can sometimes be difficult. Okay, but just remember that it's not you they're ticked at, it's the process or their experience. Okay, so and then make sure you know again the policies within your company, so you know what needs to be done when somebody starts actually getting verbally abusive. If that's the case, a lot of companies, when that starts happening, automatically want you to escalate the call. Okay, let's face it, most phone support people are not paid to sit there and be cussed at and everything like that. That's what the managers are for. So go ahead and pass that off to them and then let them deal with it. Okay, continuing on, if they complain about a product or service, again, don't try to pass the puck. Say, oh, that's not our department, that's so-and-so. Okay, because that's just going to make them even more irate. So be careful there. If the complaint is against your product, try to identify the underlying problem. Okay, it may be that they're running an incompatible version of the OS, or they're running a software that was made for a different OS. Something like that. That may be why they're coming up with so many errors. Okay, sometimes it's simply just making certain progress will help them to calm down a little bit more and to know that, okay, this problem is going to get resolved. It may not be right now, but I can see the resolution in the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay. Point out ways you think communication can be improved. Again, finding a tactful way to do this can be very difficult. Okay, just let them know, listen, I'm here to listen, but when you use that type of language, I tend to shut down. So, let me help you out. That kind of stuff. Okay, let's see. This one's another pretty big one, is the customer decides when the work's done, not you. And I know this one's another hard one. Okay, when you think the problem's resolved, make sure you let the customer go through and check everything. Okay, have them reopen the software or try to recreate the problem. If it is fixed, then they can say, okay, yeah, it's working fine now. Okay, so also make sure and have them go ahead and try to reboot the computer to make sure that everything's still working after it reboots. Because a lot of times, just because it's working right then, doesn't mean when they reboot, the problem's fully resolved. Okay, just make sure they're fully satisfied before you close out any ticket. If you have any data that needs to be restored, make sure that's restored and they can verify that it's all there. Okay, then go over the service ticket with them. Okay, say you called with this issue, we did this to resolve it, problem is now fixed. Okay, and this is where it gets kind of difficult, is a lot of users, they will think that once the problem's resolved, you're there to train them for the next, so much amount of time. So you've got to, it is crucial to go over the preventative maintenance with them, but again, you're not a trainer. So if they need that kind of service, then they need to contact another department, or you can tell them who to contact. But the preventative maintenance will not only help them, it'll end up saving you in the long run as well, because you're not going to be sitting there having to make trips out to their house every 2 weeks because they didn't run this scan or they didn't do this. So what I usually do, and this is just personal, when I work on somebody's computer, I usually go through and I create a little folder on their desktop. And I tell them, I name the folder routine maintenance, or routine scans or something like that. And in it, I put their antivirus. I put spyware, the spyware program like Spybot or something. I put Malwarebytes or whatever malware program I have, and stuff like that. I put shortcuts to those in that folder, and I tell them, okay, once every 2 weeks, once a month, go through and run these scans on your computer. Okay, and that way they're doing their own preventative maintenance. And explain to them, listen, if you do this, it's going to save you $60 every 2 weeks when I come out and try to fix your problems. And when you start explaining to them like that, they'll be, oh, well, if it's going to save me, $120 a month, then yeah, I don't mind doing this at all. So make sure you kind of go to it from that respect. Okay, there are instances where you will have to escalate the problem. And just keep in mind, this does not mean that you're inadequate by any means. All it means is a lot of times basic phone support doesn't have the privileges or the permissions to do certain things. So for instance, if you're basic help desk phone support and somebody calls and they're needing access to a specific folder, you can't do that. A network administrator has to do that. They have to grant access to that. So then you escalate it to them, they grant access, and then you can close out the ticket. Okay, so it just depends on the chain of employees on where things go. So just if you have to pass it up, make sure that you follow up that things are getting taken care of and the ticket can be closed out. Okay, and the last one for this section is working with coworkers. Okay, and this is another one that's easier said than done, but you always want to put business needs above personal needs. Okay, try not to be offended if somebody ticks you off or something like that. Again, that's really hard sometimes, but you want to try to put your business needs first. Okay, keep negative opinions to yourself. Practice good organizational skills. Again, documentation. Because not only will that save you in the future, but it can help your coworkers as well. Okay, let's face it, some problems you may only come across once every 6 months. It's really hard to remember what you did to resolve that problem. So, if you make your documentation, write everything down, oh, okay, I did this 6 months ago and I did this to resolve it, and then bam, your troubleshooting is cut down from 2 to 3 hours down to 15-20 minutes. Okay, so it really helps. And then finally, know your limitations. Be willing to admit that you can't do something. This, and I'll just tell you from personal experience, if it wasn't from coworkers and them sharing their knowledge, I would not know, a quarter or half of the stuff that I know now. It really is, it's a whole lot better in the long run if you learn to swallow your pride and say, hey, I don't know how to fix this, but somebody, so-and-so said that you dealt with this 2 weeks ago. What did you do to fix it? And you'll be surprised how much they can end up helping you out. Okay, and it may not be that they're smarter than you. It may just be that they dealt with that instance or that problem before, so they know what it took to fix it. Okay, so if you go from that respect, it's a little bit easier to swallow. All right, so that's it for this section. Next section is going to be dealing with the basic troubleshooting skills that you may need.